Hi, I'm Ed. Welcome to Common Sense.
And I'm John.
Hey, John.
How are you doing, Ed?
I'm good, thanks. How about you?
Oh, excellent. So we talk about Thomas Paine and common sense a lot in our discussions as a kind of inspiration for revolution and change and that sort of thing. But the idea that any of this was easy back in 1776 is completely wrong, of course. Um, just to put it in context, the American colonials had been under British rule for quite a few years when the war broke out, and it broke out as a result of a lot of frustration over high taxes and lack of representation and that sort of thing. But it's interesting to speculate, what if the British had been a little smarter? What if they had treated us colonials fairly instead? What if they had been reasonable about taxes and they hadn't been quite so heavy-handed about imposing their laws? We might have averted a war, or even stranger would be that today we might be a British Commonwealth country like Canada or Australia. So it's interesting to speculate about all that, but it does raise the more general question, which is, what if we treated others as we expect them to treat us, to sound kind of biblical? How do you think that translates into business, Ed?
Well, it translates directly into business, obviously, and a lot of companies talk about it. You hear all of this stuff about how it's cheaper to retain a customer than it is to get a new one, and you hear mission statements about caring for customers. The problem is that often the pitter patter doesn't match the chitter chatter. I mean, we've all had experiences. Just call into an auto attendant somewhere in the switchboard and try to get somebody that can actually help fix the problem efficiently. I often joke about, or don't joke, but say I think that companies' executives ought to call into the same number as customers and get that experience, and that would be, I think, formative. The bottom line is, it's not about the talk. It's a really simple problem. It's not easy to fix, but it's simple. All you have to do is really solve for the customer and experience things as a customer and understand, whether you're a board member or an executive or a mid-level manager, what that customer's experience is like. Not the way you think it is sitting in the boardroom or looking at some sort of a tree, but the actual experience that they have. So we've all had those experiences, and as consumers, we all recoil at them and tell horror stories about them and spread the word about companies that are difficult to deal with. But it persists. Why is it that despite this intense personal pain that we each have, that when we turn around as a business, we tend to do the same thing?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it really goes back to a lot of the structural discussions we've had previously, and by that I mean the silos that we create in our companies for different things. For sort of natural to set up a silo or a department or a division or even a team for different types of activities, like generating leads, closing sales, implementing new deals, and then ultimately providing customer service. So we typically have a firewall between all of those different groups or disciplines. And that's the real root cause of the problem. So if you turn it around and think about it, as you just discussed, with the continuum of customer experience, they're expecting us to know exactly how to treat us at each step of the buyer journey and then the customer journey, what happens after the sale. And they're expecting us to, handle every challenge with the same level of compassion, with the same level of enthusiasm, and, all those sorts of things that are always missing whenever we have a customer support call. Or we just get put on hold, or we get handed off to someone who doesn't know what they're talking about. So it's very common. And to get around that, companies really, it's a big problem, as you can tell, and they really need to rethink the whole process, the whole customer journey, from when they were first investigating us to all the way through purchase and then use of the product, and then ultimately, repeat sales, things along those lines, updates, and that's usually missing. So that whole strategy needs to be rethought. And it's very common though. So it's not like any of this is a surprise to any company that's out there. I think most struggle with these issues. But there are some examples of companies that are really doing it right. And just some of the ones more recent ones, you think about Zappos in the online shoes area, that they just provide outstanding customer service. That's really surprising. People actually buy more shoes because they've enjoyed that experience so much. Another one is Warby Parker, which sells eyeglasses online, and it's just such a seamless process, and everything is high quality through delivery and follow up and repeat sales and everything else that people really admire and follow Warby Parker. So how can companies get there? How can they be another Zappos or Warby Parker, especially if they're not in that kind of consumer industry and things are generally more traditional?
So more traditional maybe, but I think that as we talked about earlier in this series of conversations, B2C is blending with B2B because we all have these consumer experiences and expectations that now kind of bleed over into what we do. But first, I think companies have to really face up to the paradox that we've kind of touched on here already. Much of the growth that most companies experience comes from existing or repeat customers. I mean, in aggregate, over time, that creates a substantial portion of the growth. And yet, when you look at the attention that marketing and sales focus, they focus on going and getting new customers. And so, the first thing that companies can begin to do is to actually track where the revenue is coming from and what the attention's being focused on. If the expression is that you can only manage what you measure, then let's start to measure it. And let's begin to track new versus existing customer sales and projects and revenue and all the kinds of incremental or indicative measures that we can look at. If you talk about existing customer satisfaction, you can also begin to use metrics to track, if it's a software product, what modules are they using? If it's a mechanical product, a machine or something, what features are they using? What's the downtime? How quickly do they change it over? Things that are often indicative of overall satisfaction and the kind of possibility of achieving what was ultimately supposed to be the outcome that people had in mind when they made an initial purchase. Customer service should have its own marketing assets. When you've got a marketing team that thinks its role is lead generation to feed leads to the sales team, and customer service is supposed to cultivate those ongoing relationships and enrich them, but don't have any of the tools for communication and content and education that are often embedded in the marketing function, how are you going to do it? So you got to give customer service some of those tools. And some of the disruptive technology that we've talked about through these conversations can be really important. Internet or industrial Internet of Things will let companies that sell equipment see how it's being used and be able to proactively make suggestions about how to improve use of it. What features are underused? As I mentioned, why do changeovers take so long? How can you help new workers in factories or new workers with software, whatever the case may be, quickly get up to speed? One of the things that you often see is places kind of the companies and departments and employees tend to develop routines. Just, there's a habit, there's an easy way, there's a shortcut, there's what's familiar, and that becomes the answer. And often that's a version that's inefficient. It's just what's familiar. And so how can you help companies recognize when they're using a product in a way that doesn't maximize the value of it? As you begin to track those things using technology and observe and figure out where there's opportunities for improvement, then marketing automation can be the engine that lets you in a very efficient way drive proactively some of training suggestions and insights and try this out and best practice is this and other leading companies are doing this kind of thing and have you considered doing this? All those sorts of proactive suggestions. Those go beyond obviously just tracking the renewals and the reorders, retention and churn. Those metrics in the end don't kind of they're a snapshot or a retrospective. they don't track the angst or the concern or the frustration that people feel along the way that leads to the sort of churn. And so what you want to do is use the tools to capture the indicators that there's going to be a problem. And management needs to demand those numbers. They need to see it from a high level, not just some net promoter score, but they need to understand what's leading to churn or why they're losing repeat orders and where the steps are along the way that friction develops or that disconnect happens. But that's all labor intensive. I mean, there's a lot of, it's easy to talk about how the technology is there, but there's a lot of work to do it. So how can companies, when you really get down to it, how can they manage that sort of observation, measurement, and communication?
Well, I think the challenge you were just talking about, that disconnect between use of the equipment, for example, or which features and so on, that's all very different for each customer, right? So what you really need to do is find out exactly what's happening on the individual customer level. And you need to have tools in place like marketing automation or customer relationship management that alerts your team when those things are not going smoothly. So for example, someone's just not using the product.
Right.
You should have some sort of threshold built in, and then someone should be notified immediately when that happens. And then the game is to respond in an appropriate way, not just sort of check in and say, how's it going? That's not really helpful. But sending them some useful tips could be very helpful, or some ways that other people are using the same technology or the same product to achieve goals, to get them kind of fired up about that. So you could use your internal marketing systems, and they also have customer service management systems that do similar things or could be integrated with marketing, to automate that sort of response process and just make sure people are getting, they're happy with things. You can send them periodic surveys and ask them specific questions. You don't want to do a whole bunch of those things because you don't want to weigh them down with all your stuff. But just checking in isn't enough. You really need to be much more proactive and help them solve specific problems. And that's really the role that CRMs and PRMs for the channel partners actually do. So use of technology is important, but you really have to have that process for response behind it. And then also enable your customers to do things themselves, because a lot of times they don't want to get on the phone with you or go back and forth. So give them something that's interactive online, like a chat. Chat bots, for example, have been developed that pretty much, it's a little more personal than an FAQ page, but it answers, up to 80% of the most typical questions, because you're going to keep track of those, and you're going to have those responses kind of ready to go. And then for the other 20% that really are much more personal, like a billing question or a delivery question, for example, you'd want to have a team of real people backing that up. So you'd have a chat system that may actually go live to a real person under certain circumstances. And you want to have that intelligence built into it so that your website is really responsive and delivers that, the best in class customer service. That's the way the Zapposes of the world work. And then, today they're developing artificial intelligence applications that can even more effectively answer some of those questions when they arise, just by understanding what the question is and then responding back to you without even having a person backing it up. So, that's coming. And then don't forget that your experience, your people develop the product, and you've had lots of customer experience with it. So develop good content that sort of answers the most asked questions. And videos are also great for showing people how to use the product most effectively. And they're even developing learning tools and augmented reality nowadays for this sort of thing. So, don't be afraid to investigate all the possibilities out there to help your customer service be as effective as it can possibly be. So, what should companies be doing now to start building that capability?
So one of the first things they have to do is recognize that the persona for a customer is often different than the persona for a prospect. I mean, if marketing only understands that prospect persona, and now we talk about creating content for buyers, we're going to miss the mark. It's a different, could be the same person, but now they're wearing a different hat, and they've got a different way of looking at it. The content has to be different. And they also, companies have to think, again, solve for the buyer. So understand that to have the same chat pop up on every page, do you have a question, maybe I can help, is silly. If you know it's a customer and you see they're on a product page or on a support page or on a question page or something like that, you can have the chat prompt a much more appropriate and much more sensible question to them that just establishes a feeling of collaboration. But in terms of the content itself, the key really, imagine just sitting down with your customer service people or with your technical service people or with your field support or whatever the case may be, and do a brain dump. The questions that they're being asked all the time in person when they're on the phone with somebody or in their facility or doing training are precisely the questions that you want to start to answer. And once we get that baseline done, then we can begin to add to it. So the questions that they would ask if they knew what to ask could kind of be the next phase of it. And that's where you can create real value for customers. Think of it, though, as a framework, that how you create the framework that answers these questions in a way so that it's easy for sales to know which content to use, it's easy for your chatbot to know which content to use. I mean, it's structured in a way that makes sense. The byproduct of that is that content that is designed to support customer service can also be a great lead generation tool, because somebody that's looking for answers about a competitor's product, struggling, trying to find in the FAQs how to fix the problem, could well, if you're answering those kinds of questions properly for your product, you can also kind of answer them in the abstract and get found with organic search for that sort of thing. So it can be a great lead generation tool at the same time. Companies often feel overwhelmed when we talk about starting an initiative like this. It just feels like a monumental task because there is a lot of content that's got to be created. But, of course, it doesn't have to be created all at once. It can be created according to a set of priorities, and it can be created gradually. And that becomes a much easier way for companies to ease into it. The other piece, when you think about the fact that the status quo wins so many deals now, this content that can facilitate lead generation because they may be looking at a competitor trying to solve a similar problem can also address the big trust issue that's kind of at the center, as we've talked about along the way, of how buyers make decisions. And by answering these kinds of questions that they probably ask proactively because they've had bad experiences in the past, you can build that trust and reduce the risk, the perceived risk of making a decision, and help overcome that barrier, the status quo that often gets in the way of getting deals done in complex sales. The other thing that tends to happen, though, in terms of engagement and satisfaction, is the opportunity for upsell and cross-sell. And that's tends to be the first place companies think about, why they want customer service, because it'll help boost revenue. But as we're talking through it, it's really an outcome if you do the other things right. But speaking specifically about upsell and cross-sell, how can companies make that work so they generate those additional profitable sales?
Well, it's a great question. It's kind of a big topic, but what happens is that we get focused in customer service typically on solving issues. It's more like trouble tickets. It's more like problem solving with billing and so on. And we forget to think about how we can turn this customer that's just been acquired into a new customer or spread the wealth out to other divisions, for example, or other departments, other users. So that goes back to customer satisfaction, and all the things we've been talking about really add up in the long run to a happy customer, so to speak, who's getting the information they need. They're able to get the job done and get the problem solved that they, sought in the first place. So it's an important part of this, and there are things you can do to really enable that success part of this. The ROI part of this has to do with getting people, ready to buy more product through upsell or cross-sell, and willing and happy to stay with you because things are working so well. That's the churn part, or the lack thereof. So the first thing you can do is just make sure it's easy. Don't build firewalls or paywalls around your information. Don't make people sign up for every single thing you do, because they've already paid you. It's not a matter of making money out of putting a video online. It's about having people get the answers that they need, that they're looking for. So again, don't block your valuable content. By the way, you really only need to do the capture of information one time, and that should happen during the sales process and marketing process. So, you should have that information in your CRM and your marketing automation systems, so you really don't need to keep collecting it and asking them for more things. So the next thing is understanding the value. You really want to help them understand the value of an upgrade or a new product. So make sure that that's crystal clear on the website. Your pricing page should be very clear about different levels or different options and what those things cost, and more importantly, the value that they deliver. So make sure those pages are as clear as they can possibly be, and the more transparent they are, the better. Don't go back to this old idea of, well, we'll get them interested and then we'll get them on a sales call. That's just not helping, especially customers who are already there. So again, as transparent and as thorough as you can be. And then make sure your content really helps them understand exactly what it is they're buying. So give them information about the buying process itself, what it is they're getting, how it's going to be delivered, how it's going to be implemented. All of those things are important to making the decision, but they're also important post-sale so that people understand what to do next. And then, there are other problems that they're going to want to solve. So go beyond just the standard use. Also talk about allied problems or new problems that may crop up. Different things that they may not have thought about in the original sales or buyer journey. So creating, innovative ideas about how to use the product, and also helping them understand that the innovation is coming from you. So, what are you working on? What's the product roadmap look like? What's next? What kind of excitement can you generate from new products that are coming out a month from now? So that stuff is very important. It should be not only put on the website, but talked about in your blog, emails, social media, however you can communicate with your customers. So all of this put together creates kind of a culture of service that should permeate through the whole company and across channel partners as well. You really want them participating as much as possible. And really that should galvanize your product reputation, your brand reputation, so that people, there's word of mouth out there that people are recommending you to their friends and their coworkers and collaborators. So if we do all this and we win new customers, we win new sales, what else can we do? Can we also shorten the sales cycle? Can we make things a little more efficient? How would that work?
Absolutely. And, a lot of times in the complex sales world, companies get repeat orders just because that's the easiest. That's the default. That's the status quo. engineering departments don't want to change platforms. They don't want to have to learn how to program something new. They don't want separate inventories of spare parts. So companies kind of puff their chests up feeling very comfortable that they've got this great loyalty, when in fact it's kind of an embedded sort of almost requirement that customers feel in some cases just buy the same thing. So the key is to have them do it because it's the right thing for the business, because they're excited about it, as you said, not just because they feel like they have to. And there's certain kinds of content that will help to reduce the churn, help to increase loyalty. Case studies are a great example, and they're applicable for first-time buyers as well as repeat buyers. They're also a great way to share best practices and additional capabilities of something so that people then get better satisfaction and better use out of it. Referrals that can come from repeat buyers are a powerful tool that can be used to shorten the sales cycle with new buyers. It's a not kind of the tricks that people do where, oh, do you want to blast this out to your contact list, but a very personalized outreach in cases where there's a lot of satisfaction, maybe where you fixed a problem. That's often people for whom you fixed a problem are often the most appreciative and loyal, and that could be a great opportunity to ask for a referral. The personal interaction is critical to making the whole thing happen. Obviously, you can automate a lot of it to observe when people aren't getting full advantage and to proactively offer suggestions. But when you ask for a referral, it's got to be personalized. The last piece of this, though, or an additional piece, though, is really around selling directly and having the vision and understanding how the tech stack supports it, and understanding the right tools to enable this sort of a customer culture, if you will, or a customer service culture. It's easy to talk about software. It's easy to have a mission that talks about taking care of customers, but putting everything together in a system that actually works gets tricky. And particularly when you're talking about selling through channel. So I guess the question for you is, when it comes to practically putting in place a tech stack to do this, and in some cases doing it through channel, what suggestions, as the MarTech Whisperer, what suggestions do you have for companies on how to do that?
Well, we talked about this a little bit in our last session, and really the foundation of this is a good relationship with your channel partners. So I'm assuming now that you've gotten that in place and that you agree on how you're going to go to market, how you're going to sell. You've even agreed to work together at a variety of different levels. So with that out of the way, I mean, the technical part is relatively straightforward. So you can share PRM systems across multiple organizations, and that would enable you to manage accounts, sales, and customer service from a common database. So nothing gets missed. In other words, the customers always get treated the way they want to be treated, either by the channel partner or by the manufacturer. But then you can also organize it in different ways. So you can manage the lead process. You can manage how to contact customers at different times. And you can really streamline the whole process of sending out content about product announcements, how-tos, and other types of information that you want to share with customers and with prospects to keep them up to speed. So that's relatively straightforward. It can be done. The second part, though, is more challenging, and that's really about people. You really have to get people to use these tools. And you really have to do it in a way that isn't, top down. It's much more people see the benefit of using them. So the channel partners need to be helped out through education, through, just getting together and talking about problems they're facing. So some sort of community is a good idea. Are they open to collaboration? Will they be defensive about it, or will they embrace the opportunity? So all these things need to be explored personally, and the more you can do that in person, the better. And then really, the interesting part of this is who's going to do the upselling and cross-selling and make sure that repeat orders are done. So you have to have that process figured out. Who's who's responsible for what in the, you know, the customer journey, so to speak. So at the organizational level, you really have to figure this out, and then you have to leverage technology to make sure that these things get done at the right time, at the right place. So really, all of this puts together, you know, a kind of an interesting perspective, and that is, if you're really going to grow and you're going to do well in, you know, the next few years, this isn't sort of an option. It's not an add-on. It's really an important thing. And just as an example, it's not in manufacturing, but Ed and I are partners with HubSpot and have been over the years. HubSpot is a marketing automation software company, and they started a partner program in 2009. And you know, there were just a few of us when we started out back in that time, and it's grown to over 2,000 agencies now. So it's been an amazing growth for them. They've generated over 40% of their revenue has been generated by this partner program. And HubSpot grew revenues 12 times over, from about 5.5 million in 2009 to over 71 million in 2013. So it's been an amazing success story. It can work, but it's really important to through your partner network, provide that support. So customer service extends not just to customers, it also extends to your channel partners and helping them understand how to use your products, how to talk to their customers, you know, all that kind of support and technology sharing that goes on is super helpful, and it can work. It does work.
That's a great story, John, and so an interesting point about sales channel and how technology enables it. So sales channel people tend to think of as a way to go get new business, you know, locally and all that, but it's a great way to hold on to business, to ensure loyalty, to provide better engagement, et cetera. And the HubSpot story is a great example of that. So we've talked about, along the way, we've talked about marketing, we've talked about sales, we've talked now about customer service, we've talked about sales and marketing alignments. We've got this ecosystem of these traditional silos that we know have to fit together in a better way than they have in order to take care of buyers. And so the next time we chat, we're going to be talking about closing that loop, if you will, or integrating all of those functions together in a way that really provides an ecosystem that supports what buyers expect. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. In the meantime, thanks for joining us today for Common Sense.